I am new to RTM and have been trying to find what makes RTM different. What is it doing to carve out its place in the industry? I get decentralization with CPU brackets Ghost Rider, but I think futures transactions the way RTM did them is a first. That's right, yeah. Assets are great, but how are they done different and or better than other projects? Let's say, for example, assets on Raven versus RTM. Why would people choose RTM assets when they hit mainnet before contracts are available? Are there any other projects which offer contracts in common languages at this time? All right, so there's several questions there. I think the main difference between Raven assets and our assets is transaction decoupling, which doesn't exist on.
That's not really part of assets per se. The structure is somewhat different, and we don't have the restricted assets that we've got that Ravencoin has, where basically you lock different assets to a wide list of addresses. We don't have that.
I think if we do some comparisons with some other chains while we're on here, I mean, we can start off with Cardano. They've got a max supply of 45 billion. Their consensus is Ouroboros proof of stake. They are a distributed stake network. Their scaling solution is not yet fully implemented. It's actually called the Vassal fork. Current performance of Cardano is 250 transactions per second. Their smart contract language is somewhat obscure in Marlow Plutus. And then we move on to Stella. Stella's max supply are 50 billion. Their consensus is federated Byzantine agreements. They have a scaling solution called auto federations, and they have voting in with that as well. Their performance is somewhat better than Cardano's at 1,000 transactions per second. It tends to be fixed on that. It doesn't tend to change in the way they've deployed their blockchain, which is fairly cool. Their smart contract language is upcoming. It's not fully deployed yet, and that's going to be Rust based. Yeah, their rewards for their proof of stake at the moment is only around 1%, so that's pretty dead in the water at the moment. So I think they're working hard on changing that maybe soon. Moving on to the Waves protocol, again, their supply is actually unlimited as far as I understand it. They have leased proof of stake with a distributed node system. Their scaling solution is it's just dependent on network throughput, so it changes depending on the amount of transactional data that's going through it. Strange thing about Waves is because the network's not currently used an entire, well, not very much really. The last I looked at their TPS was, I think it was 1.6. But obviously, as I said earlier, that's just scale up depending on how busy the network is. Their smart contract language is something called ROID, which is another kind of obscure language. So, development pool is limited. Moving on to, we could talk about Polygon. Their max supply is 10 billion. They're primarily proof of stake. Their decentralization is a DAO with interconnected blockchain networks. Their scaling solution is a little bit different to the others that I've mentioned in the fact that they're stacking protocols in order to get extra performance out of the chain. So they're just basically layering the chains. Their current performance is pretty nice at around 7,000 transactions per second, plus or minus, but it does seem to hover around that range. Unfortunately, their smart contract language is Solidity, as we always talk about the exploits and things with Solidity. Their yearly APR tends to be a lot better than those other chains I've mentioned. We move on to Solana, again another chain with no limits to its max supply. They have something called a hybrid proof of stake and POH as well. They are not very decentralized, Solana are not, because they're quite validator heavy. They have something similar to Polygon in that they chunk in transactions per node, and so basically they will have a centralized command that tells the other nodes what transactions they need to process, and that's how they can have a throughput, high quick throughput of transactions on the network. It's currently at around 4,000 TPS, but it can go much higher, as seen in tests that we've seen. But yeah, again, very centralized. Their smart contracting language is Rust, and it's getting quite a good developer pool, still about the same as Solidity in the grand scheme of things. But their reward APR is a lot better than the other chains I've mentioned as well. Moving on to Ravencoin, their supply is the same as Raptoreum's, 21 billion coins. They are literally a proof of work chain. They have a DEX consensus and security model. Their scaling solution is, well, literally non-existent. Their performance currently is at 116 TPS, which is a lot lower than the other chains we've just talked about. They don't have a smart contracting language planned. Neither are there any talks or literally anything substantial in their development side of things going on. They are primarily a GPU mining coin, and they tend to mine very warm. Is that right, Sherm? Then we can move on to something like Algorand. They are at 10 billion max supply. They are primarily proof of stake. They're not very decentralized because they have something called permission gatekeepers. Their scaling solution involves PPOS, which is a random validator selection, a little bit like Solana. Their transactions per second right now is, I think last time I looked, it was like 10.38 or something like that. But it does scale up a little bit like Waves does in the way it can scale up depending on network throughput. I think their max is around 6,000 transactions per second, something like that. Their smart contracting language is quite obscure. It's called Teal. Again, I mean, I've worked on Algorand projects and possibly over there as well, and I know that one of the main issues that they had was their smart contracting language and getting people to build on chain, and there was a lot of grants and things to try and encourage developers to do that. Their current reward APR is getting lower and lower as well, so you know the incentive to actually stake with Algorand is getting minimal by the day. Then we can move on to Ethereum. Ethereum is chain-based proof of stake. One of the main issues with Ethereum is two addresses control literally 43% of all the validator pools. Their scaling solution is something called ZK, optimistic rollups. Their TPS is not as big as you might think. It's 29.33 or something like that TPS currently. Obviously their smart contracting language is Solidity, which we absolutely love, don't we? The reward APR for their staking is currently at around 3% plus or minus. Yeah, so you know, not great exploits and various things on Ethereum, and we've talked about it so many times until we're blue in the face, so no need to mention that anymore. But then we can move on to Raptoreum, which is who we are, and our max supply is the same as Ravencoin at 21 billion. We are a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake, with everything done at wallet side, which is great for SEC compliance and things like that. We've got over 1,000 nodes now on the network, fully decentralized, and we've also at times approached over 15,000 miners. Our solutions to scalability, as we've spoken about earlier, is transaction decoupling. Charlie's created a tool the other day to measure TPS on the network, which was 180 the last time we measured, which is more than Ravencoin. On our test models that we've got for transaction decoupling, our TPS was at around 8,000, which is comparable with some of these other top chains, which is pretty nice. Our smart contracting language is not a language, it's languages that we're working on, which is obviously Java, Python, Scala and more, using the distributed application umbrella of Apache Spark. And our yearly APR for nodes is a lot more than these other chains. I don't know what it is at the moment, something like, I think it's like 12 or 13%, isn't it? So that's a lot higher than these other chains as well. So all in all, I think when you compare to several of these chains, we're in a lot better stead with our development goals, and we are certainly excited from a team's side of things in deploying the network as we want to deploy it, because we know that we can make a good stand